Happy Friday, Dog Nation. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Going to be a fun show. Jeff Sentell. We have not talked to Jeff Sentell on this show in what seems like about 6 months. It's not quite been that long, probably only a couple of weeks. It just seems like it's been a long time. So a lot of recruiting news to get to with him. I'm going to try to get to him a little earlier in the show, just because there's so much to cover with all of that. Interesting photo is kind of leaked out. I'm not quite sure what to make about that. We'll talk about that at some point in time. I've got a long list of golden shoes I'm going to award today, because some of y'all have sent some very funny stuff, mocking me incessantly, which I don't mind. I think it's kind of funny. So we'll do all of that. Have a really good time. Interesting stuff around the SEC. It is all on the way next. It is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It's presented by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I want to start today's show by making almost the opposite point that I made the other day. Not contradicting myself, I don't think anyway, but just basically looking at the other side of a coin that I may have addressed on a previous show. I talked at one point in time, and it may have actually been on a Friday if memory serves, but my memory is also prone to fail, about how with Georgia bringing in some of the high-profile transfers that it's bringing in, and gosh knows, as you start thinking about next week and what you're most eager to see with the Georgia practices that are about to take place, how an Eric Gilbert fits into the offense, how a Darian Kendrick, how a Tyke Smith fits into the defense, as deep and loaded and as talented as this Georgia team is, how those guys fit into all this is obviously one of the fascinating subplots as we head towards the upcoming week when Georgia practice gets ready to begin. But what we said on a previous show was that as talented as these guys are, measurable talent, right? I mean, Pro Football Focus loves Eric Gilbert. You can decide for yourself if that matters or not. True, more mainstream, tangible praise for a guy like Darian Kendrick, who has, been a all-ACC performer during his time at Clemson. Tyke Smith, measurable, mainstream, tangible hardware for him there as well. He was on multiple All-American teams a year ago. Also, I guess Pro Football Focus there too. So you've got these credentials these transfers are bringing in. That's a big deal. But how they fit in, it's not just good players. It is, to use intentionally bad grammar, good players who also play good together that really matters here. We talked about the role that team chemistry plays in all of this, that the players coming into Georgia, these high-profile transfers, they have to have something to buy into. They have to have something to join, to make themselves a part of. And it was the job of veteran players, in some cases guys like maybe Amir Speed, for instance, who've been waiting in the wings, waiting their turn for their chance to play, who are going to help contribute to that team chemistry that gives the transfer players a culture to fit in with and belong to. That was all going to be a big part of that. But the flip side of this is, for as much as the talent for as much as the team chemistry matters, and as much as the program vibe that's already existed at Georgia, for as much as that's a big deal, the fact of the matter is the overwhelming amount of talent that some of these new transfers that bring to Georgia, that's a really big deal there as well. It almost kind of reminds me of, you think about sports for a moment, like if you were to say, like, what are the most fun jobs you could possibly have in sports? What are the jobs that would possibly be as much fun as anything? I always sort of felt like that being like a sixth man on a basketball team would be like a really fun thing to be able to do. You can kind of come off the bench, you start jacking up threes. You don't have to play defense for the full game, up and down the floor for 48 minutes. Like when I was a kid, the Pistons have like Vinny the Microwave Johnson, like the microwave back when they was even kind of a new technology. You just kind of come in, you sort of heat things up, and you go back and sit on the bench here a little bit. That in sports, sometimes you kind of need that energy, you kind of need that spark. And for a Georgia program that obviously has a lot going for it, it's very deep, it's very talented, it's one of the best programs in all of college football, one of the programs most set up for a chance to succeed here this upcoming year. Sometimes you kind of need that spark off the bench, the way that a sixth man would provide that for you in basketball. Sometimes you need that new energy to kind of step in there and just give you a little extra dynamic quality, give you a little dose of kind of what you need there. And that's what some of these new transfers may have a chance to do for Georgia when the season sort of officially begins next week with the start of practices. In fact, let me go back to SEC Media Days for a moment on this on a couple of notes. There was one of the press conference rooms that Kirby Smart was in last week where when asked about the need at defensive back, a big reason why Kendrick and Smith are even here to begin with is because of the void left when guys like Tyson Campbell and Eric Stokes move on and DJ Daniel and Richard LeCount, a lot of those names, Mark Webb, that leave an opening for other guys to step in. That's a big part of why Tyke Smith is here, why Darian Kendrick is here. And it was really interesting last week to hear how candid Kirby Smart was on the subject of his need at defensive back when he spoke to the media. Take a listen to this and see if you think that same thing as well. Here's Kirby.
When Tyson and Stokes took over, we had just lost players. And when they leave, we're going to have to find new players. It's part of the off-season and part of the recruiting process to figure out who's going to help us in those areas. And we've got capable players in the secondary. We don't have the depth that we are used to. We will need to avoid injury in that area.
I think that's a very candid statement from Smart. We don't have the depth that we're used to maybe around here. We got to avoid injury at defensive back, and obviously the unspoken subtext to that is that's also why you go out and get a guy like Kendrick who could be a first-round pick, Tyke Smith who also could be a first-round pick. It's that immediate spark they're expected to provide, and I think you could see, probably will see, some of that as soon as next week when you start hearing some of those rumblings and reports coming out of Georgia practice about who's kind of setting the tone. Talented players like Kendrick and Smith joining in, being a part of a Georgia roster that's already got a lot of culture and chemistry working for it. I think they could provide a pretty dynamic spark next week. I think the same thing is true on offense. And, I'll invite you to listen to yesterday's show where I thought we had a really good conversation with Terrence Edwards, a guy who knows pass catching, was a great receiver at Georgia, knows Eric Gilbert well, another one of these big transfer names, the Dogs. And we were talking yesterday about how Gilbert might be used and what the theory was of, is he exclusively going to be a wide receiver? Is there a chance he lines up some at tight end still or something that at least looks a little bit like a tight end to most of our eyes? And I think different people can have different opinions on that. I think there's some room for some range on that. Clearly, Gilbert himself wants to be a wide receiver, but how he's used is going to be interesting. However, no matter ultimately how he lines up and where he stands in the formation before the play is called, ultimately the same way that a guy like Darian Kendrick and Tyke Smith can provide that spark for you defensively, pretty clearly Gilbert has a chance to provide that same spark offensively, no matter where he ends up ranking on the end-of-season list of most receiving yards, most touches, things like that. The presence of such an overwhelming talent, such an obvious to the naked eye, you can look at him and see this is a guy who brings some real on-field credentials. That's the kind of thing that really has a chance to provide a spark for Georgia. In fact, Kirby Smart last week, once again, talking to SEC Media Days, and the way in which he spoke about Gilbert, you get a sense of just how true that really is. Here's Kirby once again.
There wasn't a lot of communication there. It was a time where he was back home training, working out. He was in the portal, but nobody really knew what he was going to do. There was a thought that he may go back to LSU. Obviously, there was a time where he was committed to Florida, but I never spent a lot of time worrying about it. We worry about the players that we get and not the ones we don't. I learned a long time ago that I can't control the decisions of 18, 19-year-olds, so we just told him he has an opportunity here. If he's interested, let us know. It wasn't a constant pursuit, not something that we consumed ourselves with.
As an opportunity there at Georgia, let us know if you want to be a part of it. Ultimately, that's what Gilbert did, and next week we may see the dividends kind of pay off on all of that. I guess ultimately here's the way I kind of think about a lot of this kind of stuff, that it has been said before that humans kind of have a simultaneous desire for both certainty and uncertainty. They like knowing they have a stable job, stable place to live, but they also like a little excitement in their life every now and then there as well, and I'm sure you're probably wired the same way. I certainly feel like I'm wired that way. I think football teams are to a degree somewhat similar in that you've got to have stability. You've got to have some pillars in your roster that contribute to team chemistry and kind of give everybody something to rally around, some sort of form of cohesion. But in addition to that, you've got to have some dynamic qualities too. You got to have some guys that show up every now and then just sort of spice things up. And even if Kirby Smart in the clip you just heard kind of downplayed the arrival of Eric Gilbert, behind the scenes, the Dogs coaching staff high-fiving each other when they have a chance to add his spark to this Georgia offense. Same thing for Darian Kendrick, Tyke Smith there as well. Kirby at SEC Media Days may say, we're not really quite sure what these guys bring to the table because we haven't seen them practice yet. But deep down, they have some idea that for a Georgia roster that was already pretty deep and for a Georgia team that's gotten used to playing with each other, there's a a dynamic spark coming next week. A couple of those names on the defensive side of the ball, one of those names on the offensive side of the ball, and I expect them to spice things up here pretty quick. What does it result in as far as end of season for Georgia? Still too early to know that. But does it make the early days of these Georgia practices a little more exciting? My guess is the answer to that will be an emphatic yes. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. Also right there at the top of the page at DawgNation.com. Man, that's a lot of fun to be able to do. So many of you found that and you're enjoying that. You're already going to DawgNation.com anyway, so just go there and watch the show each and every day. It seems like it's been a pretty good viewer experience. In fact, if you've got some feedback on it, I'd love to hear it. But so far, so good, it seems to be on that for right now, which is really kind of a cool thing. Also, podcast on all the various podcast platforms. Our friends on the radio in Athens, on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Lots of ways for you to get in touch with what we're doing here, and we just appreciate you being with us no matter how you get to us. Also, big thanks to our friends at Kroger for making the show all possible. And y'all hear me say good things about Kroger all the time, and I say that obviously from the perspective of a Kroger shopper. But here's the one thing you can also know is that Kroger is also a great place to work there as well. In fact, some of you are going to get a chance to find that out today. I want to make sure I give you all the details on this. This is really important. For those of you who need a job, and right now folks do, there's a hiring event going on at all Kroger stores today. It's from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. Interviews are going to take place in person there at the store. Listen, I can't recommend this employment opportunity to you enough because I know the way that Kroger takes care of its employees. I talk to Kroger employees literally all the time, and I know how happy they are. Kroger offers competitive pay, benefit packages. Also, they're hiring for all departments. Now, there's some special needs they need, so I want to make sure you're aware of this. The overnight stocking department, grocery pickup, and perishable service departments, so they're in the stores. These are great jobs, great chance to really work hard to put food on the table of the folks in your community, and what more rewarding work could there be than that? And you get a chance to do that today. Kroger hiring event, all stores in Georgia today from 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. So please make sure you check that out. I think you'll be really glad that you did. It is Jeff Sintel here coming up in just a little bit. We'll talk a lot of UGA recruiting with Jeff. Before we get to that, though, I want to go around the doghouse here today, delivered by our friends at Marco's Pizza. And as I said to you last week, it's so much fun to have Marco's Pizza back here again on DawgNation Daily. And I want to show this to you on the screen for those of you watching on video just briefly. I actually don't know much of the details behind this. Maybe I should. I don't know who the person being shown in this video is. Maybe Jeff Sintel, our recruiting insider, does, or maybe some of y'all do. So Barstool, of course, you know Barstool Sports, they have a UGA account. And so they tweet out this little video, and I took a snapshot of the video. The Barstool account asked, how are we feeling about this red on red? And what you see is someone in a Georgia uniform wearing the traditional red Georgia jersey and the red Georgia pants. Now I can't quite tell if this is the same red pants from the Arkansas game a year ago. I don't quite see the sides to see if they have that gigantic white stripe. I told you before, I love the pictures of the uniforms that Georgia wore for the Arkansas game a year ago. But in person, being there at Reynolds Razorback Stadium during the season last year, the white stripe on the side of the uniform was just too wide. It almost looked like a set of white wall tires from like some Cadillac back in the 1980s or something like that. They were just a little too wide for my taste. And look, you see a photo like that of the red on red, it gets some fans excited. Certainly people who are younger than me seem to get really excited about that kind of stuff from time to time. But my response to this is why we can't have nice things. You know, for someone like me who's like against almost all forms of change, the argument we always seem to make is slippery slope. And we said this last year when Georgia wore those red pants for the Arkansas game. As cool as it looks, and I think it looks awesome with the white jerseys, it does remind me of the Herschel Walker era and some of the really, good days of Georgia football kind of before I was born and certainly before I was old enough to pay attention to what was going on. But I said back then, the problem with this is it's a slippery slope, and pretty soon you're going to see red on red and red on black and everything else, which is what some Georgia fans want. But, I am a little bit of a traditionalist in all of this. I've sort of made peace with the black jerseys. I don't mind those. I don't really like the dog collar on the neck, but I don't really mind the black jerseys too much anymore. That's one of those things I've kind of made peace with a little bit. But you're going to have a hard time convincing me that Georgia should go away from one of its honest traditions. I mean, it's actually one of its official trademarks. The silver britches, even though they're not really totally silver like they should be, the silver britches are that's an official trademark of the Georgia program. You're going to have a hard time convincing me that's what Georgia should do, going away from those silver britches a little too much there. But nonetheless, pretty interesting stuff. There's also some of these accounts now too, which I really love, and this is something I do enjoy. that kind of have their own spin on things. So like really talented guys on and gals on like Photoshop and things like that. They'll make their own Georgia uniforms and create their own designs. And I don't mind seeing that kind of stuff. You know, it's almost like the uniform version of a concept car. I don't mind seeing that, but you're going to have a hard time convincing me to get Georgia to go away from the tradition. But nonetheless, Barstool shared the red on red. That got a little bit of chatter here on the around DawgNation over the course of the last day or so. So I thought it was worth at least bringing up the program there for a moment. That is Around the Doghouse. It's delivered today by our friends at Marco's Pizza. And, of course, Marco's is one of those things. It's so much fun to have back on our show, doing incredible stuff, including offering you great value as you head towards the weekend. How about a bundle of large one-topping pizza, pizza bowl, and cheesy bread, all for just $21.99. Incredible savings there. Really, the secret to living your best life is pizza. I'm talking about the kind of pizza that you get at Marco's Pizza. You see it on the screen there, that so craveable crust, the melt in your mouth, 3-cheese blend that just looks so good, and incredible savings there as well. As I said before, a large one-topping pizza, a pizza bowl, and cheesy bread. It's all just $21.99. If you want to find out more about that as you head towards the weekend, check out the Marco's app. Download that if you haven't done that yet. Also, find them online at marcos.com. Marco's Pizza. Pizza lovers get it. Here's something that DawgNation Daily listeners get: a chance to talk some UGA recruiting each and every Friday. We have not done this for a while with our buddy Jeff Sintel, but it's a great time to do that right now as we go on the road, assisted by AAA. Big updates and some 5-star names, some elite 4-star names that are kind of maybe sort of in the mix with Georgia, maybe looking to find out more information on that. We'll do all of it with Jeff Sintel on the road, assisted by AAA, and it's great to have you with us as well.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
I was joking a little earlier. It feels like it's been quite a while since we've talked to Jeff Sintel. He was on vacation last week, and it's fun to get these updates from him right now. Jeff, let me start with a cordial greeting. Good morning to you. Welcome back to the program. Hope you enjoyed your vacation. Hope you're getting settled back in the state of Georgia here once again and ready for what's going to be a big run-up towards signing day eventually in December, and, you know, more of the fallout from what's been a busy summer for recruiting already. So it's great to have you on the program to talk about that here today.
Yeah, Brandon, hey, good morning, man. I heard you talking about the red on red, Dayon Bowie. You know, Dayon Bowie kind of snuck in last night. I think a lot of folks were thinking and expecting he'd show up over the weekend. He got in early, you know, Bainbridge, former 5-star decommitment. And, you know, I don't know, Brandon, I don't know, what was the more sensitive material to you? Was it the fact that Dayon Bowie was back, 5-star prospect, former prospect in the class, or the fact that they went red on red with those Arkansas red pants?
Yeah, that's certainly interesting. I did not realize that was Bowie in the video that we just showed. That certainly spices things up a lot more. And, you know, listen, if Dayon Bowie wants to wear red on red, then maybe I can get talked into it, right? But ultimately, I'm probably a little bit of a traditionalist that would like to try to convince some of these young guys that the silver breeches are probably still the way to go, even if they're not quite as silver as they should be, or as silver as like some of these NFL teams' pants are, like the Dallas Cowboys, teams like that. Somehow we can figure out how to do the metallic silver for these NFL pants, but we can't quite figure that out for college. But listen, if Dayon Bowie wants to wear red on red, then I guess at that point in time, I guess you got to let him at least pose for the photographs that way, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, Brandon, with as much as has changed in college football over the last 5 weeks, I don't know. I would think there might be some world where Georgia might be wearing chrome pants, a chrome jersey, and a black helmet sometime coming to a Nike design scheme grid near you, man. I mean, after all this, I don't think nothing's going to surprise us anymore.
Well, speaking of Bowie, who kind of was somewhat connected to 5-star defensive tackle Bear Alexander, there's also been a little bit of chatter about Alexander on, like, say, Instagram over the last couple of days, whatever else, that maybe Alexander may have made his way back to the state of Georgia. Is there anything to this, Jeff? Do you think Alexander's still in the mix for Georgia at all? You know, this is, I guess, by my count, at least the second time he's been back in the state since he decommitted, you know, from the program. What do you make of it?
Well, I think you got to remember, you know, I think you said a lot there, Brandon, when you said might be back in the mix at all. Well, I think he's kind of going to be in the mix. Most people think that Texas A&M is going to win this recruitment in the end, but there's something to remember here. He hasn't made that commitment yet. He saw a lot of schools in June, but you know, I think what it is, Brennan, is probably there's a lot of hope. at least people that follow this recruiting day to day, that I talk to and that I kind of listen to and get their sample of opinions from, man. I think there's a lot of it that everybody sees. You know, Travis Shaw is not going to be in Athens this weekend. Likely another trip to North Carolina. So, and then everybody's wondering about Walter Nolen. Walter Nolen's supposed to be in Texas A&M this weekend. That defensive tackle picture, man, is not so rosy. So I think the revival of maybe the Barry Alexander hopes is something that a lot of folks want to latch on to. I do think he comes back to Georgia for a game this fall. I do think Georgia is in there, but, you know, silver, bronze medals, Brandon, we say this a lot. I don't think Georgia is right there with Big Barry Alexander.
Well, another five-star name there's been some chatter about lately, and, you know, last Friday on the show, one of the things that I talked about was if, you know, you're looking to see Georgia kind of use the Branson Robinson commitment as a way of building momentum, you had to start looking at some of those big names that Georgia may have had some sort of loose connection to and hope to see evidence that connection is growing in the weeks to come. And I guess if you want to have kind of a pie-in-the-sky hope here, you know, one of those names for me would be like a five-star wide receiver like Luther Burden, who I guess admittedly there is a little bit more online chatter about here a week later than there maybe was a week ago when I first mentioned that name. You know, a lot of the theme of our discussion today is what's real and what's not. Is it an exaggeration to say that Georgia's in the mix for Burden? Is there something here that you believe is real?
Yeah, I think Georgia's in the mix. I think Georgia's a top three, top two school for Burden. But remember, Brandon, he's committed to Oklahoma, and now Oklahoma, you know, there's the thought that Oklahoma would be legitimized a little bit more with the SEC now. So, you know, maybe that's 2 years from now, maybe that's 3 years from now. But I think, like I said, I've said a lot on a lot of platforms, man. I think Oklahoma and Texas to the SEC really just strengthens Oklahoma and Texas's recruiting platforms, and not so much as Georgia's or any other school in the country. I like the comment from, I think Brett McMurphy had it on Twitter, where he says the SEC, it just means more ... money. And, you know, Burden's is that receiver everybody wants to see, Brandon, but this is what I said on Before the Hedges on Wednesday, Brandon, is it doesn't matter anymore what Georgia can show folks on a slip and slide or at a great like water fun environment on a lazy afternoon weekend July anymore. It doesn't matter what they do on Zooms. It doesn't matter with the facilities and the weight rooms and everything else. I think the maximum, most important recruiting Georgia will do in 2021 is simply going to go on the field, Brennan. I know this is not giving away the secret sauce here, but, you know, kind of like what we talked about on our most recent Cover 4 that went up on the site where we did our over-unders. If you don't have a big season from Georgia throwing the football, all this Luther Burden talk is kind of madness, because Georgia's going to have to look like they're piping that football in there. Big-time offense, scoring a lot of points, gunslinger quarterback, big play receivers. If none of that happens this fall, well, all this Luther Burden talk is good in July, but it's going to quickly fizzle away in October.
So I think that's an interesting thing to say, and I've talked a bit about this a bit myself, and I do truly believe that what happens on the field for Georgia right now is more important than what happens off the field related to recruiting, because if Georgia recruits – if Georgia plays well enough, then recruiting is going to be fine. And if Georgia doesn't play very well, it's going to be hard to hold on to a lot of elite names anyway. So I would certainly agree with you on that. However, I think it's also one of those things you do have to point out here is that, you know, by the time Georgia proves one way or another how good it is, we're actually getting really close to the start of the early signing period. You know, December happens to be a very important year both on and off the field related to this. So, Jeff, I mean, I hate to be negative here, but there is a chance that Georgia could have a good year on the field and still this not quite be the recruiting class that some Georgia fans have come expected to it being, because you kind of have the right level of momentum, even with guys who are not silent commits or, you know, not obvious leans, not as open about favoring Georgia as maybe Branson Robinson was. But you got to have at least enough of kind of an arm's length of distance away from some of these guys so that you can still sway them with a good season, right? I mean, you got to be close enough for a good season to matter here. And I think that's what, at least the best that I can tell, what the remaining days of this summer is about, making sure you stay in the mix enough so that if recruits, you know, see what they want to see on the field, that you're still, you know, the kind of, you know, program they're taking texts and phone calls from once decision day truly arrives. Is that a fair way to describe that in your mind?
Yeah, I guess, Brandon, let me give you the visual the way I see it, and I'll use a golfing term here, but I think Georgia just needs to stay 1 or two shots off the lead with a guy like Burton, with a guy like Andre Green, who took another big visit to Clemson for their retreat recently. I think that's what needs to happen. Here's the visual. Obviously, you should beating Clemson would be great. Also, I think throwing the ball around a lot would be great. And beating Clemson, JT Daniels averaging like 300 yards per game, 2 or 3 touchdowns per game. I think that's going to put Georgia in striking distance with a lot of those guys as they really get to the meat of the matter with making their decisions in like November. And unfortunately for a lot of the scenario that you were kind of wincing about is when you got Georgia in the next year, man, a lot of these guys are going to make their decision on the early signing period in mid-December. They're going to wait and take official visits late in the year. So I think Georgia's going to be in a spot where, they play well, they beat Auburn, they beat Florida, put up some numbers in doing so, they make the SEC championship game. I think that's what a lot of folks want to see, especially for those impactful recruits. I thought when I changed up the top targets board this week, Brandon, we had 4 names come off. We had 4 new names come on. And I think really we've reached the meat of the matter where you look at Andre Green, you look at Oscar Delp, you look at Kamari Wilson, and then you look at what's going to happen with a defensive tackle. I think those 4 names are really going to decide what kind of recruiting class Georgia has.
Yeah.
Top 3, top 4 class? Is it a top 1, top 2 class? I mean, there's other names out there like C.J. Madden, other names out there, like DJ Wesselak is a new name. That's in Missouri, the guy that's picked up a lot of interest in Georgia of late. But I think there's about 4 or 5 names that will really tell the tale of this class.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Green there, in a lot of what we were just saying about Burton a moment ago, and this is where, I just have to be honest. I'm not a recruiting reporter. I'm someone who follows the news and talks about it on the show like this, and I'm also a partisan that hopes that Georgia can sign the best class that it can. But in the case of a guy like Green, someone that I think we would both agree is one of those Plan A type recruits for Georgia that, like whatever the best version of the Georgia class would be, a guy's like Green you would think be included on that. If you're thinking, most optimistic appraisal for UGA, but that's also a guy that over the last few days, last couple of weeks, it just seems like it's gone a little quiet on the Andre Green Jr. front. Am I wrong in saying that? That, one of the things that I just notice are some of these guys that I think of as kind of your Plan A type UGA recruits, and the dog is just not barking at the moment very much.
Well, in Andre's case, he's going to be very reserved. There's very few folks that he talks to. He's not very open. He's very guarded with the information that comes out. Again, this is a different pace guy. A great reset I can give you guys on Andre Green Jr. is I think this is, eschew the rankings. Eschew all the rankings where they have him as a top 20, 25 receiver. Guys, Andre Green Jr. is a top 5, top 6 wide receiver talent in any year. He's got that 6'3", juicy size, great ball skills, lots of one-handed catches on his film. Very determined, very purposeful, business-oriented young man. I think he's going to be a star in college football. And it was a situation with Clemson where that was kind of a dream offer for him, and it didn't come. And it didn't come until he camped for Clemson in June. And, that was, we know these stories, Brandon. Guys like Tank Bigsby, guys that Georgia got in really late, or they weren't really settled or set on a guy yet. And some of the times that stuff does some harm, especially when programs like North Carolina and Georgia keep prioritizing, keep showing the value and showing the love. Well, this is a situation with Green where he's got to decide, what does he really want, especially with a lot of momentum now from Clemson coming in. I mean, Brandon, Andre Green Jr., everybody gets excited about receivers around here. I think this is one of the best 3 or 4 receivers Georgia has recruited and been in the boat with and been in contention with in quite some time, one of the very best. And I think this is a situation with Green. He just doesn't talk a lot. And then most folks were thinking, I noticed some folks had asked me, like, is it a bad thing that he's not going to go visit Georgia in July during this last month? I don't think it is, because it was never his plan to go see Georgia. Remember, another thing about Andre Green Jr. folks got to realize is he does these things on his own pace. And I mean his own pace. He's the guy that will take an official visit, and then maybe 4, 5, 6 weeks later he'll trot out the tweet and the social media appreciation and the social media thanks for being hosted on an official visit. he doesn't do everything according to the timelines of most other recruits.
Very, very interesting stuff. I want to ask you about Walter Nolen, the five-star defensive tackle here coming up in a moment. Let me remind folks, this is On the Road with Jeff Sintel, assisted by AAA. Jeff's been on the road. Glad to have him back on the phone here right now. And, of course, as you're on the road, you think about AAA for the legendary roadside assistance. I was traveling with somebody yesterday, not my car, but somebody else's car, got a flat tire. We were going to a business meeting, got a flat tire on the way. That's the kind of stuff that happens. And listen, when that does go down, obviously knowing that you got AAA to be able to help you in situations like that, that's great. But that's not the only thing that makes AAA great. Also, legendary roadside assistance. In addition to that, you can switch and save your auto insurance. Those that do save on average $529. That's big savings. That's money in your pocket you can do something with. So find out more about this. Go to AAA.com/auto insurance. That's AAA.com/auto insurance. Find that out. Switch and save your auto insurance with AAA. So, Jeff, I was negative a moment ago. Let me be more positive here for a moment. Ultimately, I don't know where five-star defensive tackle Walter Nolen's going to play his college football. I think that he is certainly a very intriguing prospect for this 2022 class. But on the heels of him announcing that he's going to be going to high school in Knoxville this year, a lot of Tennessee fans think that greases the wheels for him to come there and be a part of the Vols program. For the most part, I scoff at that. Obviously, there's a little bit more geographic proximity now for Tennessee. They could potentially use that to their advantage, but Tennessee's got so many problems. I'm not quite so sure that I think Nolen's presence in Knoxville changes that all that much. I'm hopeful that I don't end up being wrong about that. But what do you think of Nolen now being in Knoxville and how that does alter the landscape for his recruitment? Oh, boy. We'll see if we can get Jeff back on the phone to talk about Walter Nolen there and see how all that's going. Hey, Jeff, are you with me? Walter Nolen in Knoxville, what do you think?
So Powell, Tennessee is kind of like the metro area of Knoxville. It's nearby, kind of a hamlet community, a suburb community. Here's what I think about Walter Nolen in Tennessee. He makes the move to Powell, I believe, because he's got a former mentor, former coach there that's on that staff that kind of helps him move over to there. But I think this is his third school in high school, at least maybe his fourth school in high school, counting IMG Academy in there along that stop. So I would think with Nolen, his top schools, Brandon, have always seemed to me like they were going to be Michigan, Florida, Alabama, Georgia. If for someone that's got that much SEC on their brain with their college decision, if he goes to Tennessee, I think he knows what's going to happen there at Tennessee. May stay home, may be local boy, may collect a lot of NIL money as the All-American defensive tackle type on their front. But he's going to be on the wrong side of a lot of scoreboards if he goes to Tennessee. Let's just call that what it is, especially against teams like Alabama, teams like Georgia, and even Florida. I think Walter Nolen's decision might change one or two times. Here's what's going to happen if he's in Texas A&M this weekend. We know what happens of late. Everybody has a great, wonderful visit at Texas A&M, and Texas A&M is suddenly a contender. Stranger things have happened, but I would be stunned if Walter Nolen ends up at Tennessee. I always ultimately thought this was going to be maybe an Alabama, Georgia, Florida type decision. And a player that good, Brandon, he's really good. He's the type when he's in these showcase camps, he's making top 50, top 100 offensive tackles look really silly. Nobody can block him, not even Tyler Booker, a name that Georgia fans know well and maybe wince about having lost him to Alabama again. But, Walter Nolen's situation, I really think there's a lot of meat on the bone right there with that recruiting story, and we probably haven't even gotten past the first quarter of his recruiting journey.
I want to ask you about two more names here really quick before we let you go. Yesterday, one of the things we saw on social media, again, was the return of the Delp is a dog hashtag. Jalen Walker and others were kind of pushing that. I talked last week at SEC Media Days about how interesting I thought it was that Shane Beamer, the South Carolina coach, seemed to pretty clearly be openly recruiting Delp without mentioning him by name during his time there at the podium, which kind of gives a little bit of rise to what looks like a pretty effective recruitment of Delp by South Carolina. They have certainly rolled out all the stops. Delp is a guy that I've assumed that Georgia was a lead for on the basis of some of the things that Delp has told you in interviews about how well Delp's family has been moved and the connection they felt to Georgia throughout all of this recruitment. Do you take the Gamecocks seriously for Oscar Delp, or I guess maybe any other team there as well, where do you think of, at least on the basis of how it plays out on social media, a pretty intense battle for Georgia and South Carolina for Oscar Delp? Where do you kind of come down on that at the moment?
I think it's gotten closer, Brandon. I think that's safe to say. But, this is a recruitment. And remember, Brandon, I want to make sure everybody gets the full frame, the full kind of 10,000-foot view here with Oscar Delp. I mean, Brandon, I guess I remember Oscar telling me. So Oscar had a breakout year as a junior. And he had 3 or 4 games of really amazing film. It was some showstopper performances. And then he really quickly became the number 1 tight end target for Georgia in 2022 and really the only tight end target for Georgia in 22. And, Oscar's been told by the Georgia staff that, according to the way he phrases it, or the way it's summed up, is that they're not going to take a tight end this year if it's not Oscar Delp, because that makes a lot of sense. You think about Darnell Washington has at least 1 more year. You think about Fitzpatrick might return. You think about, Brett Seither's there, Rylan Godey's there. Finally healthy Rylan Godey is for the first time in his Georgia career. And then you've got, obviously, Brock Bowers, who looks like he's walking on water and almost a semi-near starter already in certain formation packages for Georgia. He enrolled early. Georgia is really loaded at the tight end position, and the fact that Delp would be the only, addition at that position, because he's such a guy that you have to have in the program. I remember Oscar telling me that Kirby Smart said, "We don't really have anybody like you in the program with the speed, the blocking ability, the hands, the size, the athleticism." I mean, Delp has really put it all together, and I think we saw on social media where he had a 315-pound bench press with some reps heading into his senior season. That's pretty stout considering he's a high school tight end still. I think South Carolina is basically treating him like a Herschel Walker type recruit, like a mainstay anchor of the class recruit. The thing with South Carolina is, I don't know if they have the quarterback that, you see him talking to Cade Klubnik a lot with Clemson. Delp, the only school he's visited so far in July was to Clemson. Clemson has always kind of been that school, whether he may or may not give them an official visit. He's kind of got one of those saved in his back pocket. So, with Delp, that's one of those huge names, Brandon. I think I've got him 2nd or 3rd now, highest ranking ever on the top targets list. It's one of those names we can just simply say, if he's not in the class, then this is not the best class Georgia could have put together in 2022.
Last thing for you, Anaya White, the 4-star edge, is one of those guys that I don't want to say I moved on from, but I pretty much convinced myself is probably not come to Georgia. And then he goes on Twitter and teases the idea of taking a UGA visit. And then after that, it seems like it kind of went quiet on that notion. And so I was down, up, and then down again when it comes to Anaya White here. The honest truth is I have really no idea where all this is trending. Do you think that Georgia's still involved in Anaya White? And what did you make of the fact that he at least teased the possibility that he might take a Georgia visit?
So I think that's proportionate to Tyke Smith. That's maybe one of the major things that Georgia has going for it in the Anaya White recruitment. He also put out on social media that he's going to come out with a Final Four or a top 4. And the interesting thing for me will be what school sneaks in there along with, Alabama, Ohio State, and Georgia. According to what you hear, what you know, it might not even be Alabama leading that recruitment anymore with Anaya White. It might be a really strong push here from Ohio State, as well as Georgia trying to get into that mix. So, I mean, he's another All-American player. He's another All-American edge. But I think the other thing, Brendan, we got to make sure probably we recycle this plot thread every segment as well. But, everybody wants to see Georgia have a 1,000-yard receiver and with 12 catches, and for JT Daniels to throw for 4,000 yards and 35 to 40 touchdowns. But everybody also wants to see Adam Anderson and Nolen Smith combined for 20 sacks.
Yeah.
And that's the way you open the door, or you get the feeling from an Anaya White that, he wants to do some of those Chase Young things in college. He considers himself a pass rusher. That's his trait. That's what's going to get him noticed eventually by the Sunday League. And, that's another thing where Georgia's got to show marked improvement in 2021, because one thing for Kirby Smart is he adapts very well to recruiting trends and recruiting needs. And, you see, the promises now for the tight end position. You see the promises now and the outright expectation that Georgia's going to sling the ball around in 2021 for on a lot of those fronts. And I think Kirby Smart has reached the point where he realizes that the sack numbers are going to happen because really what it is, Brandon, kids notice NFL draft status and getting guys into the league as much as they do SEC titles and national titles. Maybe it's not the same thing as winning the Natty or winning the SEC for Georgia, but a situation where Georgia has Adam Anderson and Nolen Smith as, second or third team All-Americans or first and second team All-SEC, that's really going to help them with the recruiting through a lot of those sacks. That's really going to help them with the recruiting of those two guys.
Jeff Sintel, you can watch him each and every week on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger. That's Wednesday night, his recruiting show. You can obviously read him each and every day on the pages of DawgNation.com. And here every Friday as we go on the road, assisted by AAA. Jeff, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate all of the interesting recruiting update. We'll look forward to reading a lot more from that. And, of course, getting a chance to speak to you here on this show again very soon there as well. Looking forward to that.
All right, BA, man. Have a great weekend, man. Sorry about that flat tire, and we'll catch you later.
All right, see you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC.
All right, fascinating stuff there from Jeff Sintel. A lot of recruiting update, and not all of it great news, but I guess there is still time for some of that to change, and we'll see how that goes. What is great news, though, as here on DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger, we continue our final day worth of giving out our Kroger 5-Star Kid winners. And this has been so awesome. And I've actually heard some great feedback about this. Talked to some folks yesterday who are like, BA, I've been hearing you tell these stories about the Kroger 5-Star Kids each and every day. And just so much fun. Honestly, this is one of the great things I get a chance to do. It's one of the reasons why I love partnering with Kroger because, listen, obviously, you have business relationships, things like that, but I like the people there because they like celebrating people who are doing great things. We did this back in the spring with our 5-star moms and now our 5-star kids the same way. Each and every one of these stories. And I wish, for the people who've kind of sifted through all of these and drawn the winners out and, given out the T-shirts, things like that, even a lot of the stories that I haven't had a chance to personally hear about myself, they've just been telling me about how great all this is. But the 5 winners that were drawn, the 5 names we've read here, I mean, the stories just keep getting more and more enjoyable. A great example of that today, let's congratulate today's Kroger 5-Star Kid. It's Van Shirley. This is an awesome story. One of our Kroger 5-Star Kids for today. Van's got a huge heart, huge fan of DawgNation even, watching and listening to DawgNation Daily each and every day, which obviously is certainly very nice for me to be able to hear. Van, of course, loves the dogs, loves the Bulldogs, recently attended the Jake Fromm football camp, which is probably a pretty cool thing. Just 3 months after actually having had some surgery. So Van, tough, getting back out there, was the MVP of the age group. Maybe one day, maybe on the field with the dogs there as well, like Jake Fromm once was. Obviously a really cool look there at UGA with Van there on the screen. So congratulations to Van for being one of our Kroger 5-Star Kids. What an incredible thing. And, of course, a terrific collection of gift cards, including $100 to Kroger, $50 to Domino's, $50 to Amazon, $50 to Dick's Sporting Goods. Really, really good stuff there from Kroger for our Kroger 5-Star Kids winners. Congratulations and all of that. All right, SEC through here for a moment. I got a couple of interesting quotes that will make up the majority of the SEC through. Then after that, before we're done with the show today, somebody has done a pretty good job of mocking me online, which I have to give it a little credit for. I'm nothing if not a fan of self-deprecating humor, so I will let you have fun at my expense coming up in a couple of minutes. Before that, though, so there's been all kinds of talk about, SEC expansion. What I've said on the show this week a lot is it's amazing to me that on the heels of adding Oklahoma and Texas, which is, literally, I believe without hyperbole, arguably the biggest story of the modern college football times, right? Nothing changes the landscape of college football maybe more than these traditional, what I think of as Southwestern powers now joining the SEC, making the SEC even bigger than it already was. When you think about all the fallout, all the ramifications for that, I just think it's as big as the stories we've ever seen. And yet, what's interesting to me in the aftermath of this, before it actually even becomes official, and yesterday the league did, vote to extend those invitations to Texas and Oklahoma, but in the aftermath of this, before it even becomes official, you've got a lot of folks out there wondering what's going to happen next. And it's not just like blowhards like me on streaming video and podcasts and a microphone saying, well, what if this happened? You've got the actual principals involved in these decisions who are the ones that are openly speculating. We gave you some example of that yesterday. Dabo Swinney just absolutely fantasy booking, his future of college football right there for you, your very eyes. And now you've got John Thrasher, the outgoing president of Florida State University, talking about some of this kind of stuff there as well. So Kurt Weller is a reporter, and what he writes is that before his retirement, Florida State President John Thrasher shared his thoughts about the state of college football with a local news entity there. He said he wants to make sure that Florida State's not left behind, thinking that Oklahoma and Texas is just the tip of the iceberg, but the NCAA's future viability. That's at Tallahassee.com. Here's the quote from Thrasher, the FSU president. Weller writes of Thrasher, "I don't want Florida State to be left behind. I consider us as a part of the ACC, but I also know that we have a marquee name. Clemson has a marquee name. I think there might be people coming after us. I don't know, but we've got to be prepared no matter what the options are." Now, normally when somebody says, "I think there may be people coming after me," you might think they were paranoid or something like that. But in this case, maybe Thrasher's right. Maybe, as a lot of folks have speculated, including Dabo Swinney yesterday, maybe all of this is about a potential takeover of college football by, the SEC. And I guess if that's going to happen, maybe a school like Florida State and Clemson could be a part of that. I mean, I can't reject anything on spec right now. There's nothing that I can immediately say, no, that's crazy, that's not going to happen. I'm assuming anything related to like the ACC rating would not happen anytime soon. And I think it's fair to point out, even though Thrasher's pretty proud of his own school, Florida State, and Clemson's obviously a fixture in the college football playoff, from a business standpoint, neither one of those schools bring nearly as much to the table as Texas does, and I would say arguably less than Oklahoma as well. So the motivation to rush out and get Florida State and Clemson, I know this sounds odd to say, but I think it's just objectively true. The rush to go out and grab Florida State and Clemson just not as great as it would be to go out and grab a school like Texas. I mean, the SEC already has a prominent foothold in the state of Florida, and Clemson, just for all it's worth, I mean, that's a school that shares a state with the University of South Carolina, and the state of South Carolina is very, very small. Texas, by comparison, is a flagship state university for a gigantic state. You have very close proximity to three very big cities, Dallas and Houston and San Antonio. Austin itself is certainly a growing community there as well. So the landscape around the University of Texas is just way different than it would be for Florida State or Clemson. But Thrasher's out there saying, hey, look at us, look at Clemson, maybe think about bringing us in. And then there's this. And so Dan Le Batard, you may remember him from ESPN, and now he's kind of doing his own thing. He's kind of broken off on the away from ESPN there, kind of an independent type guy now. And he had John Skipper, the former ESPN president, on his show at some point in time this week. Now I want to read the description of the interview as Skipper gave to Le Batard. This is The Spun, one of these websites that wrote this up a little bit. And as a way of just like properly summarizing this, I want to read a couple of sentences from this, including a pretty telling quote from Skipper. So what The Spun writes is, there's no real surprise that ESPN has its hands all over these moves. Le Batard, in the interview that I just told you about, half-jokingly pointed the finger at Skipper, who was an executive at ESPN for 2 decades, led the network from 2012 through 2017, about the destruction of the Big 12. Of course, the Big 12 is kind of publicly accused ESPN of being involved in this too. So at one point in time in the interview, Le Batard asked Skipper, he says, is all of this at the instigation of ESPN? Is all of this, the potential dissolution of the Big 12, is this all your fault? And Skipper says, in a joking way it's described as, but Skipper says, I'd like to take the fifth. Do I have rights on that? Now, as I said before, the tone from Skipper here is kind of joking, but it is certainly kind of striking, right, that a former ESPN exec basically says in a joking way that, yes, ESPN had its hands all over, what was kind of, basically by Bob Bowlesby both yesterday and day before that called, breach of contract, that ESPN was working behind the scenes to destroy the Big 12. And people kind of laugh at that and act like the Big 12 is, doesn't realize it's already had its death warrant signed and, things along those lines. But, I mean, imagine if you were a Big 12 fan. There's a lot about this that just doesn't quite seem right. And the response from people kind of who have been in the know previously at ESPN is just kind of jokingly shrug it all off. And so what I keep coming back to on this is I still am not running into a lot of people on the streets, in the comment section, wherever else, who are all that excited about the SEC adding Texas and Oklahoma. Now, I also haven't heard from too many people yet who are clearly able to articulate why, but something about it just doesn't quite feel right. I had another conversation like that yesterday with a pretty big Georgia fan who was like, just something about this doesn't quite feel right. And I would say that my thought process on some of this is kind of somewhat the same way, that certain elements of this just don't quite feel right. And I think when you zero in on this, I think you start to get to the area, at least for me, that doesn't quite feel right. And I'm going to say it this way. If more of college football control is going to be at the hands of the SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey, I actually feel pretty good about that because for the most part, not that everything that Sankey's ever done I love, but for the most part, Greg Sankey is someone that, from the outside looking in, seems relatively trustworthy. But if Sankey, in amassing all this control over the sport, adding Texas and Oklahoma and whatever may come after that, if Sankey's amassing all this power, but he still has to answer to ESPN, do you trust a college football world in which ESPN has essentially full control over the sport? Now, you may say, well, BA, they've essentially already controlled it anyway. But there's a big difference between control almost all of it and control completely all of it. Because think about how college football is about to change. For the last however many years, you've had a big SEC game, really the biggest SEC game each and every week on CBS. That's about to go away. In the future, ESPN's going to have complete control over the SEC television product. CBS is going away. In this wrestling match with the Big 12, the big entity that's actually kind of getting elbowed out the door here is Fox. Fox has a portion of that Big 12 contract, but obviously the ESPN swooping in to take the two entities within the Big 12 that matter most, Texas and Oklahoma. That, ESPN may have had the contract with the college football playoff, but you've had other fairly sizable entities involved in this sport beyond that. The Big Ten Network matters at least a little bit. Fox has been involved. CBS has been involved. But more and more, it seems like ESPN, as we move towards the future, is about to have total control of the sport. And for what it's worth, a guy that used to be the president of ESPN's on a podcast laughing about the idea that ESPN just woke up one day and decided to squash the Big 12 like a bug. I mean, do you really trust ESPN running the sport in the future? I mean, look at the sports that ESPN's most closely involved with right now. I mean, take the NBA, for instance. I mean, certainly to my eyes, it seems like ESPN has made a big part of its business model a connection to the NBA. Yes, Turner broadcasts some of the games, and they even broadcast one of the conference finals. But, I mean, turn on ESPN almost any given day. During the day, it's NBA talk, right? And there's a ton of shows dedicated to the NBA. You've got, like, Wojnarowski, the top NBA reporter. You've got a lot of ESPN's programming dedicated to the NBA. Well, what's happened to the league since they've been this closely aligned with ESPN? You can tell me about the reasons, and people diagnose the reasons in their own way. But since ESPN and the NBA have gotten more closely aligned, the NBA has become less popular. And so when you start thinking about why some people are a little bit uncomfortable with some of the moves that are going on with all this, I think some of what you get to is, I don't mind Greg Sankey controlling the sport, but I'm not quite so sure I want that power in the hands of Sankey, but he's still having to answer to his TV overlords that are paying for all this in ESPN. A college football completely controlled by the worldwide leader in sports? Boy, I'm not quite so sure that's necessarily a good thing. We'll make that your SEC through. And we're going to have some fun at my expense here coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, I do want to give a quick shout out to my friends at Harris Cherokee Casino Resort. 2-hour drive from Atlanta, whether it's the original Harris Cherokee Casino Resort property, Harris Cherokee Valley River, you can find them there. Casino gaming, luxury shopping, world-class spa, gourmet dining. The sports book is there. All these sporting events going on right now, including the summer games themselves. All of that, you can get your bets down, live sports wagering there at the sportsbook. They have the kiosks all over the place there as well, super convenient. Just check out the website, Caesars.com/Harris-Cherokee. That's Caesars.com/Harris-Cherokee. You can find out more about this today. It's our friends at Harris Cherokee Casino and, of course, Harris Cherokee Valley River there as well. All right, very quickly here for a moment. I have had a lot of golden shoes kind of pile up on me here, so I want to kind of do a few of these. So get ready to wrap up here today. And obviously yesterday I kind of mocked myself because I'd seen a movie a long time ago, and one of the plot points of that movie was a legal concept called tortious interference. And I was like, well, based on this movie, here's what I think the Big 12 may end up doing next. And as it turns out, I was kind of right about that, and I thought it was kind of funny. And so I laughed about it on the show yesterday, and some of y'all gave a great response to me because what I said was I wanted a little bit of credit for my legal expertise on this. Seth Rhodes sent a funny tweet in where he was like, I need someone to talk about me the way that DawgNation Daily talks about tortious interference, which I thought was really funny. But Seth, here's what you don't realize is that you may laugh at me for bragging on myself or whatever else, but I don't think some of you realize just how quite dignified and honored I am. I told our video audience yesterday that I wanted to be known as B.A. Esquire from now on to really kind of take advantage of my legal knowledge, and our buddy Mad Dog, who's always so good at this kind of stuff. I mean, look at this photo. For those of you watching on video, you can see this. Mad Dog gives you the Best Lawyers magazine. There you see the power suit, pinstripes, and look at my face on the Best Lawyer on the Best Lawyer magazine cover there. Mad Dog writes in, there's a B.A. Esquire, DawgNation Daily, on the cover of the Best Lawyers magazine. That is very funny from Mad Dog. Really good stuff all the way around from him. By the way, also, as a way of honoring Mad Dog, who's so good at giving us these golden shoe type submissions, I actually wanted to show you Mad Dog's face here a little bit there as well, because Mad Dog was good enough to send me another photo this week of him enjoying one of our great sponsors, the Finish Long Drink. There's actually the man behind the edits, Mad Dog 19 on Twitter, saying, I'm enjoying some hashtag long drink on a hot Saturday afternoon. Yeah, it's going to be hot this weekend there as well. A little long drink going to go well with that. Obviously, Mad Dog, like so many of you who are so kind to support the sponsors that support us in the program, I really appreciate that. Our buddy Haggard also weighing in to do the same thing, who says he was on his way to Panama City Beach, but doing a little shopping to get ready for that, and he got himself some Finish Long Drink there as well. He got the blue can, which is the one that I like, got the citrus soda, got the gin kick to it. Haggard, a huge thanks to you for supporting us, supporting our sponsors, and I hope you're enjoying your summer like so many other folks are, getting ready for the start of the season, doing so in style there at Panama City Beach. Really appreciate you supporting the Finish Long Drink. Just a really cool thing to be able to see. You know, we're able to stay on the air and do what we do because so many of you support our sponsors. I am so grateful for that. So for Mad Dog, for Haggard, and everybody else, we really appreciate that and hope you all have a great weekend. One more golden shoe that I want to celebrate here for a moment because, listen, if enough of you will support our sponsors, maybe one day I can be as cool as this guy. Let me show you this picture on the screen here. Sam Cully sent this to me on Twitter. Look at this boat. Good-looking boat. Nice Georgia color scheme. The boat's name on the back, it says Gator Hater. Sam writes in on Twitter to say, glad to see DawgNation Daily enjoying his Saturday. This was from last week. I'd love nothing more than to have a boat like that. Look at that big speaker system on top there. Talk about living the life. That's a great way to spend one of the few weekends we have left before the start of the college football season. And yeah, if I had a boat, I guess I'd go Gator Hater on the back of that there as well. So maybe one day, not quite yet for BA on that front, but maybe one of these days we'll be able to do that. But certainly for all of our golden shoe submissions, very good stuff here this week to kind of close out the week. By the way, speaking of the way we closed it out, punctuation mark for sure. Just 92 days from right now, Georgia goes back to Jacksonville, gets a win against those lousy, stinking Gators. We will see you Monday. DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. Talk to you then. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Make sure you check out R.S. Andrews online. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric. You can find them all there. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. We talk AC units a lot. It's about to be 100 and something degrees or whatever. So you better believe this is a great time to make sure that tired AC unit that may be on its last legs, that you get it back ready to go for the upcoming year to come. The hot summer that's still on its way, R.S. Andrews can do that for you. Our buddy Dari and the whole R.S. Andrews gang been taking good care of folks for a long time. Dari also going to be with us for DawgNation Invasion coming up in Charlotte in September, and I'm really excited about that there too. That is going to be terrific, so that is all yet to come. Let's do some YouTubes first. We'll do Facebook after that. And then we'll get ready to get you going on a good, fun weekend. So appreciate all of that. And I'm glad to have you here with us. All right, over here on YouTube here first. Jay Shipe says, will the narrative of that a 2-loss SEC champ ever be better than a 1-loss ACC Big Ten team ever be known as the standard? Yeah, Jay, it's always been my number one argument with the college football playoff is that they say one thing but do another. They will talk all throughout the lead up to the final announcement about how schedules matter and who you play matters and things along those lines, but they actually only seem to truly care about the number of losses that you have. that undefeated teams in Power 5 conferences are just treated better than one-loss teams, and one-loss teams are treated better than two-loss teams, even though in the case of the SEC, that schedule that record may have been earned against a much tougher schedule. Now, I really think some way, somehow, there's not going to be much left of college football to compare the SEC to in a future college football playoff, because remember, there's been all kinds of talk out west and everything else of a delay to the playoff expansion because of some hurt feelings over the way the SEC is handled its most recent round of expansion. So, we may see a 12-team playoff delayed here for a bit, and by the time it actually takes place, who knows how many, what we used to call the Power 5, who knows how many of those power leagues, autonomy leagues even still exist. So, I think your diagnosis has been the number one problem with the playoff is that they say one thing, they do another. They truly value pretty records, 12-0, 11-1. They value that over tough schedules. Their actual actions prove that their words, for the most part, are lies. DMart42 says, you're talking about Oklahoma State there on College Game Day. Interesting stuff. JC says, I used to love listening to Larry Munson on the boat while fishing when the Dogs played Clemson at the beginning of the year every year. Those were good times, man. And obviously, when I was a kid, a lot of the Georgia games were not on television. And so a lot of the experience that I had was just sitting there looking at the radio and listening to Larry Munson describe the game as the only way to get any kind of information about what was going on with the game. And so I have a lot of great memories of that for sure. Let's see what else. Green Soldier says, all I'll ask for my birthday is a 3-point win in Charlotte. Nothing too big. Yeah, listen, a 3-point win's plenty for me there as well. We'll be celebrating birthdays and anniversaries and Christmas and Easter and everything else if Georgia can come through and get that big win. Johnny Lester says, Herb Street lost my respect with all his crybaby virtue signaling. Maybe so. Obviously, Herb Street sometimes rubs people the wrong way. But both in 2018 and 2020, you can't, certainly say as a Georgia fan that Herb Street wasn't pretty vocal in vouching for UGA. Herb Street's been one of the more vocal proponents of Georgia. So you can, I think that Kirk Herbstreit's Twitter behavior is sometimes pretty unbecoming. But in terms of his presence as the leading voice in the sport, you certainly can't call him a UGA hater because he has really, really vouched for UGA strongly a couple of times. Scott Harris says that Kirby's high dive was pretty weak compared to Rick's. Yeah, we didn't show that video on the screen. Maybe we should have today. I'm not looking to jump from that high, so I can't be critical here. But obviously, when you're Rick and you do the full-on, flip, whatever. Is that a gainer? Is that what that's called? When you do the thing that Rick does? Yeah, Rick goes full gainer on that. I think the point here is that is not an easy thing to do. We all got very used to seeing Rick do the big dive, each and every year, and it kind of became this almost cliched thing. But the fact of the matter is, Rick is in the 90th percentile of the whole world in being able to do one of those, high dive things like that. He made it look easy. It's not an easy thing to do. Just the willingness to, because Kirby's in good shape. He's a good athlete. But, being able to do one of those, true gainer type flips off that high dive, both the will to do it and also the ability to do it, Rick, I believe, just made that look easier than it actually was. Thomas Tyson brings up a really good point. He says Kirby jumps like he's in the lake, Georgia boy to the end. That's actually a really good point. That was a lake jump, one of those jumps off of the big rock or the big dock or something like that you'd see at Lake Oconee or Lake Burton, one of those places. Of course, Kirby's an Oconee guy. That looked like a lake jump. I would certainly agree with Thomas Tyson on that. Foster Moss says when Texas and Oklahoma come to the SEC, they keep it a two-conference system. How big would you think the Georgia-Bama rivalry will be? Will it be better than Georgia-Florida, Bama-LSU? So I'm happy to say that I don't think we have much to worry about in terms of anything eclipsing the Georgia-Florida rivalry. Listen, to be kind of a self-serving blowhard for a moment, when I started pushing Gator hater stuff back in 2016, I'd say the state of the Georgia-Florida rivalry is actually pretty low. It just, you had the Fatone Bowda thing. The 2014 game was just, oh my gosh, on worst days to be a Georgia fan, 2014 against Florida certainly got to rank pretty high on that list. That was an awful, awful day. The Bowda game, I don't blame Fatone for this. I'm sure he's a great guy. I don't have a bad thing to say about him. He was just put into a spot he had no chance to succeed in. And then you have the 2016 loss there as well to this Florida team that's just average as grits. This is this is just the average team. At that point in time, I just thought the state of the Georgia-Florida rivalry was just really pretty low. And since then, I mean, this thing has some real teeth. This thing has got some real teeth to it. So you can bring Alabama in this division. You can do what you want. Georgia-Florida, I believe, is here to stay. These two teams don't like each other. The games really feel like something. So I don't worry about the Georgia-Florida rivalry slipping at all now. Yes.
Two things. One, I actually think that's where Dan Mullen has actually added a good bit of juice to the rivalry. I think there's legitimate hate on both sides now. And you brought up the Fatone-Bowden game. I have a confession to make. I had heard rumblings on Wednesday that week that Fatone was going to start. I was a senior in college at the time covering the team. And when I got home from practice that day, I burst into my roommate's room and said, we got to put it all on Florida to win on Saturday.
I hate that. It's awful. But I mean, I understand.
And we didn't do it.
Right.
And every time I think of it, I regret it a little bit more.
I know what you mean. I mean, money's money, but you hate to make money that way. But, oh, my gosh, just these were bad times. But since then, I mean, when I started pushing, because we used to end the show every day by saying, hey, a good Georgia fan's a Gator hater first and foremost. And I actually got a lot of grief from that when I first started. Now, listen, I'm not trying to tell you that that I'm the reason why the rivalry is as intense as it is right now. Remember, Paul Feinbaum's called it the SEC's #1 rivalry. Other folks have said the same thing on SEC Country Live and things like that. But when I first started saying these things, I would have never imagined how true it would become. That Georgia hates Florida. I'm like you. I've said this in the show before. It's the one compliment I'll give Dan Mullen. He's made the Georgia-Florida rivalry better. You know, if you ever watch professional wrestling, you can't have a good guy without a bad guy. And Mullen has been more than happy to play the role of bad guy to at least the Georgia fans' version of Kirby Smart as the good guy. I'll give Mullen some credit for that, but all these years later, this rivalry is every bit as passionate as I ever hoped it would be. It really matters as a true rivalry. This is not just an SEC East, kind of an SEC quarterfinal type game. The game itself matters.
So, a little bit of news while we were on the air. Texas officially has accepted their invite into the SEC. No surprise there. Oklahoma is expected to do the same later today. With the changing of the schedule, and I think the looming possibility that Alabama potentially joins what becomes the new SEC East and Georgia plays Alabama on an annual basis for really probably the first time in the history of the conference, I'm not going to say they're ever going to overtake Florida, but how soon, if Georgia and Alabama are playing on an annual basis, does that rivalry go from where it is now to another stratosphere?
Well, let's game this out like 20, 30 years, because it's hard to think that far into the future, but we're talking about 20 and 30-year things here. I mean, the odds are Alabama, and this is going to sound like I'm trolling Bama fans, but I'm just being honest. The odds are over the course of the next 20 or 30 years, Alabama won't be as good as they've been over the course of the last 10 to 15 years, because the previous 10 to 15 years before that were nowhere near as good for Alabama. That, yes, there's the Bear Bryant age, and there's the Nick Saban age, and there's like the Wallace Wade age, I guess. But there's also been, you know, the Shulas and the DeBoses and things like that the odds are that Alabama could be due for a dip once Nick Saban probably retires. So if Alabama is not as good as it has been, whether Georgia is or not, then I think it's going to make it even harder for the Georgia-Alabama game to ever rival Georgia-Florida. And at some point in time, Connor, I'd love to read more about, because people know about this, I don't really, about why these two teams didn't play before I was born more. There's all this kind of stuff about Wally Butts, the great former Georgia coach, and obviously Bear Bryant.
Famous Supreme Court case as well.
See, I need to learn more about some of that kind of stuff, about some of the stuff that went on there, what's true and what's not. It's like I don't want to say some of it out loud because I'm not really quite sure what is true and what isn't. But there were reasons these two teams didn't play more than they did, and if they're going to start playing each and every year, revisiting some of that seems even relevant for young folks today, because part of the story of these two programs is the fact they didn't play. Herschel Walker never played against Alabama. That's a weird thing to consider now, but back then there was only a 16 conference slate, and you had a lot of SEC teams that just weren't playing each other very much, and Georgia and Alabama are two of those.
All right, and the question becomes if Georgia-Alabama is going to become a more real rivalry, you would need Nick Saban to stay on for quite a few more years beyond, I think, the 4 or 5 window that I think still exists for him. And then B, you need the SEC to get to 16 teams as soon as possible.
The other thing
and I would also point out, stay at 16 teams, which I don't think anyone necessarily believes is what is ultimately the end game here.
The other thing that you need is you need Alabama to call Georgia a rival. And right
Yes.
now, Alabama would stand on a high horse and say, well, until you beat us, you ain't our rival. And that's kind of a gumpish thing to say, but it's also not 100% untrue, right? I mean, it's like, like Georgia does have an obligation to handle its business on the field. And, this is always like the backhanded thing that happens in a rivalry. Like when Florida was beating up on Georgia bad in the 90s, it became very common to hear Florida fans say, well, actually, this is not even much of a rivalry for us anymore. Florida State's actually our biggest rival. Mm-hmm. And so what Georgia started doing in 2017, 2018, 2019 is they started dragging Florida. If there was ever any thought that Florida State was, Florida's biggest rival, because Florida State had a long winning streak against, Florida. That only recently got recently got snapped. But Georgia beat Florida so bad in so many instances over the course of the 17, 18, 19 seasons that pretty much now I think you would have most Florida fans that would say that Georgia's their biggest rival.
Yeah, I mean, at least the ones that are being honest with themselves.
Right. So that's what made the rivalry bigger, is that there was no pretense of, well, it's actually Tennessee, which was a kind of a thing for the early 90s, or by the mid to late 90s, it's actually Florida State. No, Georgia, by the recruiting prowess and by the way that Georgia fans are not always the easiest to take on the heels of big wins. Florida fans, I think you can check message boards, you can check things like that. Florida fans hate Georgia now. And so it's actually, their response to Georgia that also makes it a rivalry. So Alabama's got Auburn, it's got Tennessee, it's got LSU.
Come on, you can't say Tennessee's a rival.
Well, maybe I'm just saying historically. Yeah. I mean, you've got like the more modern rivalry that's emerged with LSU, but you've got the historic rivalry that kind of matters with Tennessee, because they still celebrate that thing big.
They do.
Like it's not a thing for 364 days out of the year, but the lit cigars after the game and all the posing that goes on with that. I don't mean like negative posing. I mean actual posing for photographs with the cigars. They celebrate that big. They celebrate that win like it's still a rivalry, even if they don't care about it the rest of the year. So If Georgia-Alabama is going to become a real rivalry, then Georgia's got the obligation to get Alabama's attention.
Absolutely. And we've gone way down the rabbit hole, and I'm sure commenters are furious. If they didn't have the cigars, would anyone pay any attention to Alabama beating Tennessee for the past, I believe, 14 straight seasons now?
No, it would not really feel as much like a rivalry because of that. But I'm thinking about stealing the cigar thing. I'm thinking about lighting a cigar after every Georgia game. I think that'd be kind of a nice, an actual victory cigar. I think I may steal that. I think that might actually work out pretty well. Over here on Facebook here for a moment, Joseph Kennedy says the SEC just sees money, baby. It is what it is. And here's the problem. It's like, think about the customer's always right, that concept. Whoever's giving you the money is your boss, right? I mean, I get paid, thankfully, for doing this job. The people who pay me have control over me. I got to make sure they're happy, otherwise they don't pay me anymore. And so it's cool to see the SEC amassing all this power, but as I said before, it's the person who's actually paying the SEC to do all this that has the real power, because they can turn the faucet on or off. I'm just telling you right now, I don't trust ESPN to have full control over the sport. I just don't. I don't trust them to manage it well. I don't trust them to manage it fairly. I don't trust them to one day get bored with it and decide to be interested in something else. I just don't trust them. Plus, think about this. I'm kind of I'm obviously a college football obsessive, but I've been a sports fan across the board my entire life. I've watched all the sports leagues. So think about all the leagues that ESPN televises. Football. Who would you rather watch televise a football game? Would you rather watch NBC on Sunday nights, Fox and CBS on Sunday afternoons, or ESPN on Monday night? I don't know anybody that's like the ESPN Monday Night Football broadcast in 1,000 years, right? I mean, it's just, I think some of that's, internet piling on, but I think it's also kind of true that people just don't like what ESPN does with the Monday Night Football broadcast. Same thing with Major League Baseball. I mean, there's a lot of problems with Major League Baseball telecasts in general, but does anybody like that, A-Rod, Matt Vasgersian, whoever it is, team? I mean, ESPN's had its problems with Sunday Night Baseball seemingly forever. Those loud sound effects. It's like every time somebody slides into a base or cracks a bat, it's like these cartoonishly loud sound effects. People who like Major League Baseball, for the most part, don't like the ESPN baseball broadcast. The NBA. Is there anybody would prefer to watch a NBA game on ESPN as opposed to watching the folks on TNT do it? I literally don't know that I've ever met anybody who says, boy, I tell you what, if you want to watch the NBA at its best, watch it on ESPN. For the most part, people like the Turner broadcast just way better. For me, I know in college football, CBS, I would say, does a way better job having televised ESPN SEC games than ESPN does. I just think that's true. I mean, last year, You got the ESPN not even sending broadcasters to the games many times, even though, the network itself's worth $8 gazillion. They weren't sending the broadcasters to the game, which, coronavirus is weird and everything else. But, there's just a lot of ways in which, sometimes it seems like the ESPN television broadcast is a little bit lacking. I noticed this in 2017 when Georgia played on NBC at Notre Dame. And you watch that NBC broadcast, you realize, oh, gosh, this is how a big-time network would televise a sporting event. Way bigger feel to it than what ESPN typically provides. CBS, I think, does a pretty good job, but they're on their way out the door. That you're about to see a monopoly of college football coverage essentially in the hands of ESPN, and both in terms of the average fan's weekly enjoyment, but also the trust that the sport's going to be managed well. I'm not quite so sure that's a good thing. Steve Shaffini checking in today. Good to see you in the comments section. Jermaine King says, the SEC's new model. We are the SEC. You will join us. Resistance is futile. He says, where's my Star Trek fans at? Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of where you're getting to. Matt Rukavina says, I'd like to point out that that UGA has a lot more medals than a lot of countries do right now. Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things. I mean, I just plead total ignorance on the Olympics. I'm just not a big Olympics fan. I know that makes me sound weird because everybody's watching it right now. I mean, I've watched it some with my family, and actually I have later found out that some of the people I was watching were like UGA folks, guys and gals. And I was like, wow, I didn't even know that. So I'm actually only just now becoming acquainted with just how many of these Olympians are actual UGA performers, which is a very great thing to see. I guess there's also been like a Florida dude win too. And so you got the Auburn gal won the gymnastics. So you've got some, you've got some SEC representation here, but like, yeah, there's a lot of good UGA representation for sure. Randy Hall says, like the shirt. Where did I get it? This was from our, I guess, official DawgNation collection. I don't wear white on the screen a lot just because it makes me look white, like washed out, I mean. But I decided to go with it today because it's so hot. But thank you, though. Kevin Chapman says he hasn't been watching the Olympics much this year. Ro Hawkins says the SEC new name will be the CSFL. Maybe so. Let's see what else. What else is going on? Steve Shaffini says he likes Mike Breen. I think Breen's a pretty good broadcaster. That's one of the rare examples, I think, of ESPN kind of getting NBA coverage right. Steve says he likes him, though, because he's a New York homer, and those are, kind of New York guys. There is certainly that, for sure, because Breen did Knicks games for a long time, right? Austin Kilby writes in to say that I feel like a lot of this has to do with the SEC's popularity in NIL deals. Maybe the two conferences handle them a lot differently. Yeah, maybe so. I mean, I think one of the things, I don't think we quite yet know now just how big the name, image, likeness impact is going to be. I mean, it's obviously big, but how big does it turn out to be? I think we're still yet to determine some of that kind of stuff. He's making the comparison between how the SEC handles it compared to how the Big 12 is going to handle things like this. I mean, certainly, I think a lot of that still be determined. He says when you take away the big schools, you take away the smaller schools' chance of playing for something other than the national championship. You take away the underdog or the fun of the conference. And that's something that I have learned about my feelings a lot more throughout all of this, is just that feeling that I actually like mid-level Division I football a lot more than I realized that I did. The idea that programs like Iowa State or Oklahoma State or Texas Tech, programs like that would essentially be, irrelevant, has not felt too good to me, even though I'm not a fan of those schools. And, I mean, I've laughed openly about the idea that Iowa State should be compared as a playoff contender to a team like Georgia. Just because I've laughed openly about that doesn't mean that I don't have some sense of they haven't done anything that suggests they don't deserve to exist. And that's kind of where we're getting throughout all of this. Plus, when you think about the way in which people care about Texas or Alabama or these gigantic programs like Georgia, the fact that some of that interest does come from these mid-level schools who think, hey, maybe one day my team will have a chance to play that team, so let me watch them now because there's a comparison that can be made. But the moment that, if it really ever does break off and it's like 20 or 30 teams that are playing for what we think of as the real national championship and everybody else is essentially relegated to kind of like Group of 5 status, then if you live in Ames, Iowa, or you live in Lubbock, Texas, or if you live in, Blacksburg, Virginia, right? I mean, schools that we think of as having been ranked in the top 25, they are likely not invited to this party. Iowa City, Iowa. Iowa's got a huge alumni base, and Iowa's more popular as a football program than you might think of. But, there's a chance they could be excluded from the top of the top if that's really what it's going to be. I mean, don't you run the risk of having folks in those cities not watching this new version of the sport at all? It's just not relevant to them. And, maybe the team they cheer for is not really involved in anything that big either. But if the other version of the sport no longer even provides an opportunity for their team to play in it, then I think you run the risk of having a huge swath of this country just not watch those games anymore. And all of a sudden, that can impact your popularity there as well. Because think about Birmingham for a moment. It's always interesting to me to look at like TV ratings from these big college football games. And Birmingham is like always. I mean, Atlanta's always really high, but Birmingham is always crazy high TV ratings for college football games. Crazy high. For a national championship game, about 85% of the TVs in use in Birmingham will be watching a national championship game. Like their TV numbers for these big college football games are just through the roof. Sometimes you have more people watching college football in Birmingham than you have in the cities that are actually involved in the game. It's just crazy how much they do that because those big college football fans are interested in what teams they might eventually play are also doing. But once the number of teams that you could eventually play goes down, then what reason do you have to still watch? And I wonder how that's going to play out. All right, let me do one or two more. We got to get ready to go. Tennille Calvino checking out. Tennille, thanks for being here. Chase Barbie says he'd pay for a ESPN pay-per-view Georgia game if Ric Flair was the color commentator. Yeah, that'd probably be pretty good there as well. That'd probably be pretty good. Ron Warbington says Iowa has better hunting than football, which is pretty funny. Pretty good stuff. Let's see what else. Brian Lindsay says Tyler Simmons was onside. I like to see that. Green Soldier. How about this from Green Soldier? He says, I'm glad to see a UGA DawgNation shirt on you. You had me worried you'd pull a Connor and barely wear anything associated with UGA, which is funny. That comes up. So yesterday I just wore a regular button down. I had like a business meeting I had to go to, so I had to look semi-presentable. So I wore just like a regular button down. Then on Wednesdays, the last few weeks, I have taken the tact of wearing the SEC Country shirt as a way of promoting SEC Country Live every Wednesday, 3 p.m. on the SEC Country video channels. So I have started doing that a little bit. But other than that, I'm pretty well in the Georgia colors pretty much every day. Jay Shipe says, I can't be washing the reds with the whites. This is as white as it gets. Something about our screen's just messed up. Robert Barnes says, I'm not reading enough comments. I feel like I am reading comments. Let's see what else. G. Grace Bama Boy says Dabo tries too hard, but he likes him. I think he's talking about Dabo Swinney. No, he says Dan. Maybe he's talking about Dan Mullen. Bank 6 and the subject. They're talking about analysts over here. Bank 6 talking about Danny Canal. Yeah, so pretty good conversation all the way around here. We're gonna get ready to go. Thanks for being here. Hope all of you have a great weekend. I'll look forward to seeing you back here on Monday for DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. Also for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Find R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They'll take care of you, not just for the AC units, but if you have an electrical issue, if you have some sort of issue with your plumbing, your water, that can ruin a weekend, right? So quick phone call, explain the problem. R.S. Andrews will be on their way to solving it for you. Story after story, they've been delivering smiles, so they'll deliver one for you there as well. Also, check out my friends at the AJC, Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I don't want to get into the Corona stuff, but obviously there was some big news in Atlanta related to that yesterday, and obviously that's going to impact a lot of the school system stuff with school getting ready to start. So it's important to know what's going on. I ain't talking to you about it right now, but it's important to know what's going on. So make sure you read that online, ajc.com. Also, NBA draft last night. Hawks obviously kind of in the mix for some interesting names. A lot of praise for what the Hawks were able to do in the second round of that last night, too. I did not really follow the draft last night, to be completely honest with you. It sort of snuck up on me a little bit. But you can get good coverage there at ajc.com. And, of course, we will see you back here on Monday for DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. Have a great weekend, everybody. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.